You know all the answers to these questions because it's your life and your lived experience. Thank you for coming on and being willing to talk to me in the after metagame segment, sort of a reaction period where you get to sort of tell me what your thoughts were about the documentary itself. Maybe we'll start there, just sort of like kind of revisit what the era was like for you. But first off, like how was the sort of watching your own life in a narrative form in front of thousands and thousands of viewers?
I mean, it was very, very cool to get to watch it. It's been, it was in the making for a long time, and I think we're all super excited. And I'm a huge fan of the first Smash doc, so I was super happy to be a big part of the second one. And myself, my family, my stream, everyone were like super excited as well. It was just very cool to like get to like relive these experiences in a sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned your family was watching too. Did everybody get a chance to sort of see it? I know that the family actually played sort of a big role, I think, in sort of your description as a character and a player, and sort of came in at the end as a very sort of important part of the message that your sort of life, or at least in the context of the narrative, sort of played.
Yeah, I know quite a few. If quite a few of them have watched it at the very least. I'm not sure if quite all of them have seen it. I'm sure like some of the younger ones don't quite understand due to like language barrier and stuff. But most of the older ones have watched it at the very least and were happy, and they were also like super excited for years, asking me when it was coming out and stuff. So yeah, that was it was very cool, and they also felt that it was a good way to portray me and my story.
Nice, that's good to hear. Did you do you think having watched it, do you feel like there's things that could have been changed differently as far as your story went, or like the narrative went?
Um, I mean, I would say like 99%. I'm like super super happy. The only thing I was not the biggest fan of, but I do think it was still in the overall picture, kind of like how do I say? I do remember it was like one section was like when Hugs was describing me as this very cold Swede, and then it was like a weird interaction with me and a friend of mine actually. Uh, that was like a little bit weird in a sense, but I do think all my interviews and stuff like that kind of disprove that in a sense, right? I do think like a lot of people never took into consideration in my early days of going to the US that I literally cannot even speak the language. Uh, I think a lot of people like almost saw it as like this is exactly how it is or how he is as a person without even taking into account that if you can't communicate properly, of course it's going to be quite different, right? But I do think all the interviews from myself, my family, and so on, that it kind of like showed more to it. And based on like reactions I've seen, on Twitter, in Twitch chats, and so on, I do feel like a lot of people agree with that. So, I mean, even that like small little complaint, I feel like so much in the documentary kind of disproved it, and I think most of the viewers would notice that. Um, so yeah, besides that, no, I think it was super cool. Well, I think my favorite section was honestly the Evo story with bringing Android. I was super happy that one made it in. Because a lot of people don't know that at all. Even like a lot of the higher ups were like, wait, I never know, or I never knew this was the reason he actually did go. So I think it was very cool he made it in, and in a very emotional way. So that was probably my favorite part.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you guys were talking about it, I knew like this has to go in because I think the most interesting part of any story is the human side of it, and you guys really like opened up about that, and I didn't know about that. So yeah, I think that was one of my moments when I was listening to you guys talk about it. I was like, okay, well, this is obviously going to go in. It is interesting that you picked up on that, the whole fact that you were cast as sort of this icy person, from the Swedish cold lands in the north. Because that is something that I wanted to sort of establish as like your beginning characterization and work against it. to sort of see how, oh no, the first impressions, you guys, not the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, and that's why I think it like worked out really good. Like for people that did watch the whole thing, I do think like when you had it all together, that it was like shown that it was more to it. Uh, so that's why I'm like, it was like at first when I saw it, I was like, I don't really, like always like these narratives that are pushed, but I do think like when you got the whole picture, that it was like more to it. So that's why I think it turned out good, even
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things too. I would imagine that it's especially when you're looking at yourself, your life, where you know who you are, and especially because there is that language barrier that came in and probably was responsible for people's perceptions of you at that time as oh, he's distant or whatever. It's like, no, it's like if you speak Swedish, I'm sure you will be able to get a whole different picture of the man. So I think you're absolutely right. It's I would imagine a different experience being the person that has a story being told about you. Is that
Yeah,
is
no,
that
no, it is for sure. And honestly, like in my younger days, like probably still around the Genesis one time. If anything, a lot of people saw me as like too energetic, like almost this like annoying little kid sometimes that has too much energy and like want to embrace it.
yeah, yeah.
So I do think like the language barrier was more like it was impossible to communicate, and he always pretty much translated everything for me. The first few trips because I was very bad at English for my age as well. So not only was I young, but I was also bad for my age. But all the traveling to mainly the US, but also within Europe is what changed that.
You got really good really quickly. Just being able to interact and come over. So that was like a interesting sort of journey too, seeing your English improve. So. I wanted to ask you a few specific things about some moments in the doc that I personally loved. The first, obviously, being from episode 3, the Young Link Gambit, which is what I've called it, or I think the music in that part when you're sort of going over the different options and stuff, and how it sort of became this secret within the Swedish scene. What was your sort of your reaction to that section?
That was like one of the funniest moments with the whole Fight Club. I actually forgot the fact that I said that. So when I was watching it, I was laughing myself because it was like a little Easter egg for me because it was quite many years ago. So I didn't even remember making that reference. So that was very fun. And that's also like a thing, like when people look back, like, for people coming into the scene, like way past that era, they might know the fact that I did play Young Link, but they don't know like how it all went down and like how much of a secret it was. And that was like way before streams were a thing. And I mean, I guess they technically had just started, but like the game and the community wasn't as accessible and like spread as it is now, partly due to the first Mash Talk, right? So I do think that was cool. Not only for me to like hear the Fight Club reference, for example, but also for people seeing like how much went into it and how big of like a surprise it was for everyone at Pound 5.
Yeah, it is interesting because like there was such a perception later on, especially like when it was, I think it was Grand Finals Apex 2012, where it was like, oh, this is such a boring matchup now. It's like it's a defensive thing. Where in the beginning it really was just like it was even I think Genesis 2 was still even like man, the secret weapon is just came out of nowhere, and it really just hype just pure, and the people were chanting your name like that to me was the epitome of sort of a metagame.
Yeah, it was like I think to this day, like Pound 5, the first game I played against HBox was probably the time the crowd ever like it was probably the time when the crowd rooted for me the most in all of my time playing in the US, which is pretty ironic because, as you said, like eventually that became like the most hated matchup. But like the first time was probably the time the crowd was the most on my side.
It's so true. Although I will say there was one other moment that I remember watching the crowd sort of like really earnestly get behind you, it probably wasn't the only other time, but the when it was Leffen, you versus Leffen at Paragon Orlando, and Mango was like away, and you had busted out your Fox, and you were playing Mango's color for Red Fox or whatever, and the crowd was chanting Armada, Armada.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I mean, there was other times for sure. It was other times for sure, and I always felt like the crowd, like respected me. But I do think that was probably still like the peak when it was like because like you never saw those type of counter picks, and it was like so unexpected. So I think that added a lot to it, especially as well because Melee is seen as a game where the bad characters are very bad. I do think it's a little bit exaggerated. I don't think a lot of the bad characters in Melee is quite as bad as people say, but it's still like a bigger difference than in most fighting games, right? So I think that added to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite. The other section I wanted to bring up, or moment from the documentary, was Genesis 1. Partly because I feel like even though it was covered basically twice, once in Mango's episode and then once again in your episode, from your perspective, it still didn't pick up on a few things that you remembered clear as day, such as the fact that, like, you guys had entrance music, I believe, at that tournament. What was your song, your entrance song?
I had "Simply the Best" by Tina Turner. That became my song kind of because this was a trip from a tournament in Norway in 2007, and it was my first ever victory for a tournament, right, for Melee singles. And on the way back home in the car, that song was played, and Aniola said something along the lines that, "Yeah, today you are the best." And then it kind of just like stuck and became my song, sort of. So I felt like it was fitting, even though I sadly ended up losing the tournament. I can still at least say that that game, when that song was played, 3 stock. They should have kept playing it for the rest of the grand finals.
That is amazing. Yeah, I wish that had been caught on tape too. I would have used that section for sure. So, but that also that you also mentioned briefly the fact that and is there's sort of like a montage then at that point where it's like showing like Mango winning and sort of kind of moves on. But you did make the point, and I think you've talked about this in previous interviews, that that second roll in, or the second rest, I guess, that he makes on you is actually a bait by you, or at least it was a psychological decision where you were like, you know what, he's so hot right now. You're probably, he might be open to being like getting overplayed or his hand. What was that? Because it kind of gets glossed over in that montage, but you did make a tactical choice there.
Yeah, but it is more like a, how do you say, split-second decision. A lot of people don't believe that this did happen or that was the intention, but from my point of view, that was my intention and my play. And I think the fact that AMSA from Europe made that 4-stock comeback against Ek, it really did show like how overconfident people can be, and that can make them play worse, right? It's like they stop respecting you, which is what Mango stopped doing after that. And it was like one hit away from making it like 2.5, 3-stock comeback. And in Peach Puff, that's basically impossible unless your opponent is either way worse than you or don't respect you enough. Uh, and I mean, like other plays, like even as late as like Evo 2018, I do remember in my setting as Hungrybox because it was like best of 3, right? And it's so important to like, win your games, right? But I was like, in my game 1 against him at Evo 2018, I fell pretty far behind. And a lot of the things I had prepared for and like made notes of, I was still like mid game, like realizing that I'm still falling for the same shit that I literally told myself to be prepared for. So then by like the later half of that game, when I realized that this comeback is very unlikely, I have 2 choices, right? I can still try to win the game fully, bring out all the tricks and try to adapt to it and try to win that game. Or what I decided to do was basically like, this game is so unlikely to win that it's not like I lose on purpose, but certain, habits that I'd picked up on prior to the set even started, I was like, I'm not even going to try to punish them so he's not like ready for it in the next game. Because I'm probably going to lose this game regardless. Probably like a 95% chance I lose this game. So it's not worth to use these tricks and mix-ups if I'm going to lose anyway, or very likely. And then in game 2 is really coming down to the wire, last hit. And then in game 3, I honestly kind of destroyed him. And I don't think this is the only reason, but I think it was part of it, right? So that's like another like weird thing that a lot of people probably would never consider. But it was basically saving tricks for later in the set when that interaction is going to matter much more than in a game where I probably will lose anyway.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to me, and something that I think gets glossed over just in the hype montage, and people like you wouldn't even notice like that. Okay, well, there's a huge decision making tree behind this, or when you're in the moment, that's just super cool to me. At Genesis 2, one of my, I believe it was your episode 4. Although it's kind of hard to say, oh, this is your episode and that episode. It seems like everybody kind of gets mishmashed in there. But this is the one where your sort of arc sort of comes to its first climax, where you finally win Genesis 2. One of my favorite sections was when you were describing the trip around the Southwest in your RV going. In my mind, that is just the funniest scene, with a bunch of Swedes crammed into this thing, practicing melee, bouncing around the American Southwest. And Leffen, I talked to him recently. He said that he mentioned that you and him were practicing with his Falco, because the last time you were there, obviously it was Pound 5 was the finals, so you were kind of prepping for PP. How was that? Bouncing around in the back. Were you getting car sick while you were playing?
No, I'm not sensitive to stuff like that at all. So that worked out pretty good for me. Yeah, we like mainly played either when we were done for the day with like sightseeing and stuff. But I mean, it worked out pretty good. Leffen was still like he was good, but he was still like up and coming, right? He hadn't played for that long, but he did take a surprisingly 17th, I believe, at that Genesis. So he was like on his way to become really good, and we had played in multiple tournaments prior. So yeah. He did help me out to prepare for PPMD. And I mean, I helped him out as well in the sense of like really good practice. I can't say I remember too much details about like games or so, but I mean, back then we did, pretty much always end up playing at events. Leffen was often like trying almost to like shark me down and like get games in, right? Because he quickly climbed up to like number 2 in Sweden. So I was like the only person that was like beating him by far most of the time, right?
Yeah.
So we kept playing at like a lot of various events, and leading up to Genesis 2, that included too.
What I know in talking with him, he said that you saw the potential in him really quickly, and that you made a comment something along the lines of that, like when you win, like your first tournament, implying basically that it was almost an inevitability that he was going to win, and this was like back in the day. What was it that you saw in him that made you realize, even in those early days, that he was destined to become really, really good?
I mean, sometimes with these type of players like Leffen, Sane, and so on. Of course, I didn't notice Sane as early because like he's not from my region at all, right? But sometimes with these type of players, you do see how quickly they pick up on things, and then for a lot of these people, I feel like it mainly comes down to how motivated do they remain, right? So for me, it felt like a player like Leffen, assuming he keeps playing the game, keeps grinding as he's doing, keeps learning at the pace he's learning, then he will be at the very least a top player. Of course, it can sometimes be hard, like, will this player make it past like top 10, top 5? Like, it can be hard to like actually say if they're going to climb all the way to number 1. But a player like Leffen, to me, it was very obvious. He improved so tremendously fast, and very quickly started beating a lot of like respectable Swedish players, and he was not slowing down at all. He seemed more motivated. Whenever I did tell him advice, he always seemed to like instantly try to apply it. That's something I noticed with Sane too when we did play at like Summit 6. Sometimes I gave him like pointers and he was like just instantly trying to apply it. For most people, sometimes even if they ask for advice themselves, it's almost like they're asking for the sake of asking. But with people like Leffen and Sane, you could see that they're really taking it into consideration and then try to apply it however they seem fit, right? So yeah, for me, Leffen looked like a certain case. As long as he plays, he will be at least an S tier player.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you were right. He definitely, got really good really quickly. Did you? I remember. I don't know. As far as like the narrative went, like your sort of narrative went from you're very obsessed about first place, you're driven, and then sort of at the end at Apex 2015, it was like the one time that like it seemed like, and people made comments out of it at the time. You can hear the commentators being like, "I don't see Armada being as salty as I've seen him in previous events," and I used that opportunity to sort of dovetail it with your thoughts on what's really important in life. Did you feel like that was a genuine sort of like cut and sort of like marrying those two? How did you really feel at the end of Apex 2015?
I mean, I think one of the main reasons I didn't feel too bad about Apex 2015 was the fact that it was like the first time I went into a tournament in the US planning to use Fox at least somewhat. I didn't know to what degree. At Paragon, I didn't really plan on using Fox. It more ended up being what seemed to be the best thing to do at the time. But at Apex 2015, I went in knowing that I'm going to play Fox against at least HBox, and I had decided against Leffen as well. And then I knew that a player like PPMD, that it could happen. But I was uncertain about PPMD. So then the fact that I did end up beat HBox, Mango in 2 of the games with Fox, 1 with Peach, then Leffen, and then 1 setting is PPMD, it was like, you can't really be mad when you beat these 4 players. I mean, of course, I still lost to PPMD, but I took a set, right? So I took at least a set from 4 of the top players, where the character hadn't really brought out much in tournament before. So even though I did lose, it felt like this is like one piece to the puzzle.
Yeah.
So even though I did lose in one way, I feel like I won a lot more.
Yeah.
And it's often rare that happens, that you do lose, but you gain so much at the same time, at least to that degree. So that's why I couldn't feel mad about it. And then like a small portion was also, I was probably pretty happy for PPMD because people gave him so much shit prior. He hadn't really entered anything since Evo 2014, which was like 7 months prior, and people were like, "Oh, he's not gonna have a chance. It's like too washed up." Even like a lot of the top players were like, "He's not gonna be able to keep up. Like too much had changed." And I think me and Muta King were like 2 of the few people that were like, "Don't sleep on the guy. Don't sleep on the guy." Like, of course, he could get wrecked. He could get wrecked, but that's always a risk for any top player at any tournament, right? I feel like me and Muta King were two of the people that were more like, we think you guys are underrating him. Like it's a dark horse. It's a dark horse for attorney, and I mean he ended up winning the whole thing.
Yeah. That was, it was really such a unique sort of moment, and I think a lot of people sort of didn't. Or you could have a lot of good guesses or prognostications about how PP was going to do after a 6 months break. I think it definitely. It shouldn't be surprising that he still had the chops to win that one. Apex 2015, as you say, it was sort of a loss that you could live with because you could see all the pieces coming together. And it really kind of was true. In 2015, you won Evo over Hungrybox, and that sort of began, like, I think one of your... How many times did you were in #1, I believe, in the world in 2016? Or was 2015?
Yeah, 15, 16, and then for like the first 9 months of 2017. But
right.
Then HBox had like a crazy good ending to 2017. But I mean, I think for the better part of 2015, Leffen clearly had like the early summer of 2015. But if you look at 2015 as a whole, then yeah, that year, then 2016, and especially the streak from like late 2016 to like mid 2017.
Yeah,
that was probably like my most dominant time period.
Yeah,
I guess.
Would you say that ranks as a more dominant period than your original dominant period, which was like after like the Genesis 2?
I think it's too hard to compare these times because like the thing is like in the later times it was just so many more tournaments.
That's true.
So I mean, the more data you have, the more the higher chance for it to be accurate.
Yeah, and you were
I
like,
mean, it could have been the case back then, but if I would have to guess, I think like the later time period. Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it makes sense to me, and I do feel like there was a feeling in the air. It was like, well, there's no question right now. Like Armada is just so dominant. Do you, now that you've and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you've, that part of your life is, it's sort of set in stone now. You don't have any plans to sort of return to the game.
It's not crossed my mind once, and I really doubt it would happen. But hypothetically, like if I ever want to do something, like I have the chance, right? But I'm always a person that I wanted to compete due to like the love of the game and the love of like competing, the desire to improve, the desire to win. Sometimes people are like, oh, like what about the money and stuff? I'm like, I never competed due to like the money. Like when I started playing, there was no money to begin with. You played because you wanted to, like, due to your own personal goals and stuff like that. And I've always like held that belief that I don't want to do it unless truly like deep on the inside that's what I want. And I really doubt that would ever change, to be honest.
So yeah, and you have been putting yourself into a field, I think, that makes a lot of sense from your own. At least seems like from an outsider's perspective, a lot of sense from your own character, which is one of like getting better and improving, which is speedrunning. How's that been for you?
No, speedrunning has been a lot of fun. I actually started following SM64 with the birth of Twitch, pretty much. So I started watching like early 2012, I believe, and I've been following the game consistently since then. So like the past 9 years, and I think I always wanted to play, but just looking, I can see how tough the game was to play at a high level, and I was like, playing Melee and SM64 simultaneously, it sounds like a disaster. One of them, if not both, will take damage due to the other one because they're too time consuming. And now when I actually do play the game, I can confirm that was 100% correct. So yeah, I enjoyed it as a spectator on the side, but now when Melee doesn't take up time in that sense, I mean, I still I started playing a bit of Slippy now with like Android and playing like teams, a little bit of singles like on the stream for fun. But yeah, SM64 is super time consuming. And I'm like, truthfully speaking, I'm not even like good at the game yet. I'm solid, I'm okay, but it's only like the start. Like it's so many more hours and time that needs to be put in if I want to get to the top. And I still haven't really decided. Like my approach right now is more I keep playing, I keep improving, and I see how fun I think it is down the line. Then I put smaller goals that I'm like, this is still like quite some work and effort ahead of me, but it's still within striking distance. Then once I get there, then I see like what is like a new smaller goal that is hard to get, but still like achievable in a recent time period from now. And as long as I enjoy it, I plan to keep doing it. But a lot of people ask like, oh, are you aiming for the world record? It's like stuff like that is like years down the line if you play this game at earliest. So I'm not trying to look too much into the future, like trying to enjoy the road more.
Yeah, I like that. It's a really good way of putting it. It definitely seems too like the you don't have the pressure of like the screaming crowds and the same sort of tournament pressures that exist, and you can sort of focus more. It seems like on improvement and a lot of the same things that, as you say, they're very similar in Melee. Self-improving, seeing where you can get better. But yeah, it seems like you're really happy with where you are and what you're focusing on.
Yeah, 100%. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to continue. I do play pretty often off stream as well, just to like improve and learn new things and build on my consistency. So I hope that continues as well. And the stream seems to enjoy it a lot. The viewership, honestly, for SM64 many times have been better than like ever when I streamed Smash games even. So that's pretty crazy to me, since I'm so new into like speedrunning, while for Smash I was much more established. But people seem to really enjoy it. And I think speedrunning is like good streaming content, because people, they want to see the run, right? And even though you might have like 1,000 runs that are bad, the next one might be the run. So it's good in that sense. It's good in that sense.
That's super cool, man. I guess the last question I have for you is about the Melee community. It's about sort of where we are now, and obviously the pandemic has affected everything, and tournaments, being in person is not possible right now. It will eventually be again. Do you think that the fact that we're all sort of separated, do you think the fact that we're all sort of far apart has changed any of the elements of the community at all? Or how it behaves, or?
I mean, if we didn't have Slippy, I would say for sure yes. A lot of people probably would almost like kind of forget the game in a sense. People that might not be super into it, like they might watch once in a while, but like this pandemic, no proper online tournaments at all. Like a year is a long time, and we're approaching over a year now as well. But with Slippy, like not really. I think like it's given people so many like entertaining and good streams to watch. You can have good players play against each other on a daily basis. Of course, it's not 100% identical to offline, but it's close enough where you get like great content and you get great tournaments. So yeah. I mean, I guess the biggest disadvantage is maybe for people that just recently came into the scene. They might not know as many people. They might not feel as much as it's their home yet. So for them, maybe it could hit harder. I could see that. But for people that are already like in the community a lot, they have their friends and so on. I don't think it changed much of the dynamics in that sense. But for people that just got in, that's probably the biggest disadvantage, if I would have to guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited, man, for the pandemic to be over for any number of reasons. But I am looking forward to coming back into a tournament at some point, and seeing all the familiar faces and hanging out and playing friendlies. Do you think you'll ever end up at a tournament just for fun?
Yeah. Like I still want to go and do commentary and stuff at events. I did that a bit prior to the pandemic, and I would love to go to more events and do that. Of course, I wouldn't travel to like the same amount of tournaments as I did when I did compete, but I still want to go to events every now and then. It's so many people that you do get to meet them at tournaments. Like when you have such a large distance, it's impossible to like get to see all these people on a consistent basis. So tournaments is a good place to like get to see a lot of your friends again.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, I look forward to seeing you at tournaments very soon.
You too, man.
Thank you for agreeing to come on and talk and reminisce. And if you're ever interested in doing it again, I'm always here, dude, because I can't go anywhere else.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, if you want something more for the future as well, just hit me up. Always available.
Cheers, man. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Take it easy, man.